Discover the incredible vanishing of Thomas, a plantation owner and his slaves touching escape. The sun broke over the Grayson plantation, casting a golden hue that only emphasized the opulence and isolation of Thomas's life. He stood on the large veranda, surveying his land as though it belonged to someone else. Beneath the calm exterior of a gentleman lay a tempest of doubt. Almost instinctively, his eyes searched for James, that singular light in this darkened landscape of privilege and expectations. The air crackled with whispers of a rebellion, and Thomas, a figurehead of the Southern gentry, felt the spine-chilling pull of loyalty pulling him one way, while a budding conscience tugged insistently in the opposite direction. What would it mean to betray his family while protecting a man he considered his friend? The thought hung heavy on him. The plantations were built on the backs of the enslaved, and in his bloodline lay generations of men like his father, whose wealth had only come from the labor and suffering of others. Could he condemn James, a man with aspirations that mirrored his own? The laughter that left James's lips felt like a distant melody against the harsh reality of impending conflict. Each moment they shared in the cool shade of the sprawling oaks birthed not just friendship, but an unsettling truth. Thomas was entangled in a system that thirsted for blood as it drank from the well of bondage. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. A penetrating silence invaded the plush surroundings as Thomas retreated to his study, the walls lined with dusty tomes detailing the exploits of men he could hardly admire. The letter lay on his cluttered desk, its envelope marked with an insignia that twisted his stomach, a legacy he had never wished to inherit. As he read the words, an unexpected wave of guilt washed over him. Each line unveiled a bitter truth. His legacy was one of chains and degradation, a lineage stained by blood. James's laughter echoed in his mind as Thomas grappled with the moral weight of the secret he had unearthed. Could he forsake everything, a mother's love, a father's ambition, for a man he considered an equal, albeit in whispers? Anxiety gripped him, constricting like a noose. Every decision he made would cast ripples across both their lives, swift and shattering. As night fell, thoughts spun through Thomas's consciousness. The ensuing rebellion loomed like an approaching storm. With every heartbeat, he felt James's dreams of freedom intertwining with his own, an awakening of longing and desperation that shamed the loyalty he owed to his blood. The faint clip-clop of hooves broke the silence, a sound that announced the new morning and the world that they would have to leave behind. Thomas stood at the threshold of reason, caught between a phantasm of familial duty and the raw hunger for justice. The echo of distant shouts grew louder, fighting against the insistent beat of dawn, and he knew that soon a choice would not just define his present, but shatter the legacies of their worlds forever. The darkness gathered around him, and Thomas sensed that the moment to act was slipping away, leaving only an uncertain path bound to a commitment he had yet to fulfill. His heart raced, knowing he stood on the precipice of change, a choice teetering between everything he built and everything he could lose. The oppressive weight of indecision clung to Thomas as dawn pierced the horizon. He resolved to meet James before the sun ascended fully, an urgency driving his every step. As he crossed the threshold into the heart of the plantation, memories of idyllic afternoons spent laughing under the oak trees crowded his mind. He shook them away. This was not a time for nostalgia, but for pragmatism. He found James by the stables, tending to a mare that had captured his heart. It was in the simple gestures of care that Thomas saw a reflection of their intertwined lives, a bond developed in trust, yet shackled by a harsh reality. But today, beneath the textured coat of the mare, Thomas sensed a change in the air.
The rumblings of insurrection were not merely distant whispers, but were vibrating through his very bones. "James," he began, struggling to find the right words without revealing too much, "what do you dream of?" James paused, looking up with a mix of confusion and cautious hope. "A life free from this place," he replied, his voice steady despite the horror of possibility swirling around them. "A place where I can be a man among men, not a shadow in someone else's story." Thomas could see the fire in his eyes, unwavering determination draped in the veils of despair. With each heartbeat, another realization dawned upon him. James was not simply seeking freedom, but a fundamental recognition of his worth. The thrill of that acknowledgement sent a shiver down Thomas's spine. He was no longer simply Thomas Grayson, the plantation owner. He was at a crossroads where morality bled into duty, and the faces of his ancestors became increasingly ghostly. "I need to tell you something," he finally mustered. Raw vulnerability edged into his voice. "The time is upon us. Lines will be drawn between owners and the enslaved, between friend and foe." Thomas searched James's gaze, desperate for understanding. "If there's a way out, we must be prepared to take it together." James straightened, the weight of those words sinking in. The gravity shifted in the air, a tenuous alliance about to be forged. Yet each knew the stakes. "Together?" James questioned, uncertainty threading vulnerability with hope. "Are you willing to face your family, the men who will hunt us down?" "More than willing," Thomas confessed, a spark igniting beneath years of shame. "I can no longer stand by and hold on to the chains of my father's legacy." A moment of silence engulfed them. In that heartbeat, Thomas recognized a profound realization. His loyalty could stretch beyond familial bonds, into uncharted realms of courage and surrender. For the first time, he comprehended the true nature of freedom as not just the absence of chains, but the audacity to act. "Then we'll leave tonight," James whispered, "if you're truly committed." The sincerity in James's voice resonated through Thomas like vibrant music, challenging his foundations yet promising an unexpected harmony. Thomas nodded, excitement mingling with apprehension. As he prepared to set the course for their escape, thoughts whirled. A litany of possibilities flooded his mind. What if they were caught? Would he ever return to his family, his life? Yet the shrill echo of their uncertain world began to blur, overshadowed by emerging visions of liberation. "No more waiting," he declared firmly, the words slicing through his fear, transforming it into resolve. The thrill of rebellion surged within him, challenging his previously understated self. He felt alive. As shadows elongated with the growing sun, he grasped James's hand, a promise and a commitment, a bridge across uncharted waters. Together, they would step into the unknown. However, where that path would lead remained uncertain, and the weight of their decision hung palpably in the air, poised to alter the course of their lives forever. But just as they began to move, a rustle in the thicket drew their attention. Thomas turned to James, dread pooling in his gut. "We're not alone." The moment of truth was fast approaching. The rustle in the thicket ignited a primal instinct within Thomas, urgency thrumming through his veins. For a fleeting moment, he saw James's face shift from resolve to anxiety. "What do we do?" James whispered, every syllable a bundle of tension. The once steady rhythm of their resolve faltered at the edge of potential discovery. Thomas's mind raced, the adrenaline propelling him into a sphere of clarity. "We can't show fear. We need to act as if nothing is wrong," he advised, his voice firm, even though his heart pounded against his chest like a caged bird. The sounds grew closer, branches snapping beneath weighty footsteps, a voice calling somewhere in the distance. Thomas felt like a marionette, pulled between the strings of duty and the emerging contours of his moral consciousness. Each breath filled with dichotomy, the urge to flee and the instinct to protect, igniting an internal conflict. "Let's split up. "I'll draw them away," he suggested, though doubts burgeoned beneath the surface. James's face turned pale, his tension palpable. "You can't." "I can," Thomas replied, cutting him off. "They won't expect me to be here, standing my ground. They'll be looking for you." In that moment, Thomas felt a new layer of himself emerge, a resolve no longer dictated by his ancestry, but crafted by a burgeoning sense of righteousness. He watched James wrestle with his fear, searching for his own courage to let go. "You're right, I know you are, but promise me," James began, words tumbling forward. "You'll come back for me?" "Always," Thomas said, the promise a thread that tethered their fates together, a lifeline binding them through the impending chaos. With a last look, Thomas took a deep breath and stepped toward the trees, feeling the weight of every decision he had made pressing down on him. He trusted that this instinct, this newly discovered courage, was not mere folly. It was a decision to act rather than merely exist as his family's legacy dictated. As he ventured into the thicket, he noticed shadows dancing in the dim light, their elongated forms reflecting the fears that twisted within him. Each snap of a twig beneath his feet echoed the memories of complacency he was shedding. He was done being a mere figurehead, a bystander in his own life. Each step forward was a fracture against upbringing, heritage, and guilt. The voices grew nearer, familiarity mingling with urgency, a band of men sent to survey the land. They called his name, their voices the very texture of his burdens woven into existence. He wrestled with the realization that these men viewed him through a lens of expectation, a Grayson who would never venture outside defined roles. But he was ready to defy that image. He caught a glimpse of them through the underbrush, his brother and a couple of overseers, their faces already twisting into stunned expressions as they spotted him. "Thomas, what are you doing out here?" his brother shouted, incredulity lacing his voice. "I'm here to take charge of the business. I won't let it collapse beneath our father's shadows," Thomas declared, surprising even himself with the fierceness laced in his tone. His brother hesitated, confusion streaking across his features. Was it anger or concern? "Return to the house. You shouldn't be alone," spoken as if Thomas could still be commanded by family authority. "Not anymore," Thomas shot back. He took a step closer, grounding himself in his newfound purpose. Within, a cacophony arose, the prospect that he might lay bare his own vulnerability, that he might become an outcast in the family he was born into. But it paled in comparison to the potential of losing James and the step toward change that he could barely fathom. The confrontation reeked of tension, fraught with unspoken truths about freedom and loyalty. The shadow of expectation had to clash with the light of determination, and Thomas found himself at the precipice of accountability. But just as he began to confront his brother, the sudden realization blared through him. He couldn't remain divided from the man he was becoming. He had to make a choice, not merely for himself, but for every soul bound by the very chains he once upheld. As the confrontation escalated, a new voice within him called for action. The question remained, was he ready to face the full brunt of his family's wrath, to forge a new path for both himself and James? And in the distance, the echo of footsteps began anew, an omen of choices yet unfathomable. The tension simmered in the air as Thomas stared into his brother's eyes, where confusion wrestled with a burgeoning anger. The echoes of familial expectations loomed larger than the dense thicket around them, each moment stretching like the shadows that loomed in the underbrush. He could almost hear the whispered judgments of their ancestors, the weight of heritage pressing down on him like a yoke. "Do you think you can just?" his brother began, incredulous disbelief etching his features. "I think I can be more than what they expected," Thomas interrupted, his voice rising in defiance, barely containing the tumult of emotion.
I won't let this business, the legacy we inherited, become our prison." Each word struck like a hammer against the metal of his brother's resolve, and Thomas could see the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Perhaps he would not have to shoulder this burden alone. But he had to confront the unvarnished truth. What he was proposing was as unthinkable as it was necessary. "Listen," he continued, lowering his tone to penetrate the barrier erected by shared blood. "This isn't just about us. It's about those who've lived under the weight of our choices, people like James." He felt the intensity of his heart, every beat synchronizing with the urgency of his plea. "We can't keep pretending nothing is wrong. It's time we take responsibility." The response was delayed, as if Thomas had thrown a stone into still water, the ripples only gradually reaching the shore of his brother's comprehension. But then the hardness returned to his brother's gaze. "Those men rely on us. The estate needs stability, and I need to find my own path," Thomas interjected, the raw conviction in him seeping into the forest air like nectar. In that moment, he felt the fractures within himself heal, slowly stitching together the resolve he was forging. This was more than about being strong. It was about choosing strength in his vulnerabilities. Suddenly, a movement in the brush jolted them from their exchange. The men, unaware that their intended conversation had taken an entirely different turn, advanced with clumsy footfalls as they approached from multiple directions. Every shift of the leaves felt like an impending storm, and the weight of duty pressed on Thomas's shoulders like a stone. "Stay back," Thomas warned, feeling the call to assert authority again. The weight of expectation merged with something more profound, picturing a future where he would no longer flee from confrontation, but instead emerge from it. He briefly met his brother's eyes, as if searching for affirmation, but found only retreating uncertainty. In that instant, Thomas made a choice born of adrenaline and clarity. "You tell them to leave," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil. "I'll handle this." His brother hesitated, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You will be risking everything." "Everything worth having," Thomas replied fiercely, the words spilling forth, capturing both his vulnerability and determination. The realization struck him anew. In standing up for James, he was claiming his own personhood. The threads of his identity wove tighter as he confronted the impending chaos. While shadows continued to shift around him, Thomas noticed how the very ground he stood on felt different. He was no longer a figure defined by the past, tensions of lineage falling away with each decisive breath. The fear that had once shackled him began to fade, replaced by purpose, a symphony of resolve orchestrated by desperation. But just as he turned toward James, a voice from the shadows split the air, filled with contempt and authority. "What's going on here?" One of the overseers stepped forward, aggression threading his posture, the darkness of his intent suffocating the promising light around them. This was the moment when Thomas realized that the battle wasn't merely against his brother's expectations. It was a fight against a system set in place to preserve subjugation. His next actions would either cement or shatter the identities they had struggled to redefine. Staying rooted in his newfound strength, Thomas knew he was standing on a threshold, confrontations mingling with liberation. The moment had come to face not just the overseers, but the truths of his life that had, until now, been simmering beneath the surface. But as the overseer's eyes gleamed with self-righteousness, a different fear took hold. Could he, actually reshape his destiny? Where voices once echoed servitude, he would forge a new narrative. But to do so, he would have to reckon with the repercussions of his choices. The question loomed ominously over Thomas. Was he ready to sacrifice everything to carve an existence of his own? And even if he were, what would the cost mean for James and their fragile hope of escape? The overseer's presence was like a storm cloud rolling over a clear sky, thick with hostility and demand. Thomas felt a rush of adrenaline flooding his veins as he processed the man's sneer, the authority behind it heavy and suffocating. It felt almost unreal,
his father's legacy suddenly making a turn for the worse, almost like a shifting trick of fate. "Step aside, Thomas," the overseer commanded, his voice a low rumble. "We have work to do here, and you're in the way." In that moment, something inside Thomas clicked, a realization of his own agency, the solid foundation of his decision to confront the fear that had been festering. He stood tall, feeling the familiar weight of obligation transform into a new kind of strength. "No, this ends now." His brother's silent shock was palpable, but Thomas had no time to
spare on uncertainty. He could see the fear in James' eyes beyond the overseer, a flicker of desperation that fueled his resolve. The overseer advanced, muscles taut like a coiled spring, but Thomas stayed where he was, too acutely aware of what was at stake. "Do you think your little display of defiance will change anything? You've inherited a life of privilege, boy. You should know your role." The overseer's voice dripped with contempt, each syllable calculated to provoke. With his heart racing, Thomas found his voice, keen and unyielding. "Those days are over. We are better than this, better than standing by while others suffer." Every word was a hammer, driving nails into the old structure that held his reality captive. This was not merely about him. It was about the echoes of countless lives ignored and discarded. A tension crackled in the air, and time stretched as Thomas prepared for what might follow. This was no longer just an argument. It was a desperate stand against ingrained power dynamics and roles he had once accepted without question. The overseer blustered, stepping closer, eyes narrowing in anger as he attempted to dismiss Thomas as nothing more than an angry child. Yet that urgency simmered in Thomas's core, igniting a fiery determination to not back down, to assert his identity against the backdrop of oppression. "Step back," the overseer warned. "You don't know the consequences." "I'm prepared to face consequences," Thomas shot back, grounding himself in the realization that this was his personal reckoning. The shaky foundations of his familiar obligations were crumbling, allowing fertile ground for something new to emerge. Almost instinctively, he turned slightly, casting a glance at James. The warmth of their shared experience, once embedded in fear, sparked a new bond, forged in rebellion, a unity born out of desperation for freedom. With every ounce of strength he had left, Thomas extended a hand toward his brother. "We're in this together." The words bore a weight they'd both been denied for too long. For a heartbeat, hesitation flickered across his brother's face. Then the hard lines of uncertainty softened as James took a tentative step toward Thomas, not in fear, but with a budding confidence. It dawned on Thomas then. This was as much about redefining his own perspective as it was about liberating those he cared for. The overseer roared and lunged forward, but Thomas was ready. The stillness of a moment coalesced in the action, and he moved with an instinctual grace informed by urgency. It felt liberating. Each decisive movement recalibrated his essence, shedding older selves and leveraging the wisdom of his choices. As chaos erupted around them, Thomas understood that this was not merely about escaping control. It encompassed forging a new identity amidst the wreckage of the past. With every conflict, he dismantled the beliefs that had been wrapped around him like a cocoon, discovering hidden strengths he never knew he possessed. But even in the heat of battle, doubt gnawed at him. Would they truly break free, or would the looming threat of their legacy claw back at them, pulling them into a familiar abyss of powerlessness? The air buzzed with the potential for resolution and heartbreak. Determined, he pressed forward, feeling the flicker of hope intertwined with uncertainty. Yet even amidst the noise of emerging turmoil, a crucial question emerged, echoing in the recesses of his mind. Was this newfound conviction merely a stepping stone, or was it a path to irrevocable change? The overseer lunged, and Thomas braced for impact, readying himself for what would surely be the defining moment of his life. But would this confrontation be the catalyst for liberation, or would he be drawn back into the shadows, never to escape again? The overseer's furious advance forced Thomas to think quickly.
The lifeblood of his conviction surged again. This wasn't just about his own freedom, but also James's. He clenched his fists, grounding himself in hope, an emotion he hadn't afforded himself before. The overseer lunged, momentum carrying him through the air, an embodiment of years of an oppressive system. In that fleeting moment, Thomas's mind rattled through every choice he had made until now, each revelation morphing the fragile cocoon of his former self. The impact of their clash reverberated through him, and he sidestepped, narrowly dodging the overseer's grasp. "Stay strong," he shouted to James, adrenaline fueling his words, igniting a spark in his brother's eyes. Thomas didn't receive a direct hit, but the shockwave of the overseer's aggression sent him stumbling. He steadied himself, propelled by the urgency to protect not just himself but the future he envisioned. It was no longer about adhering to societal expectations or familial duty. It was about dismantling the chains that confounded them both. He could feel James beginning to move. "I'm here," his brother called, determination threading through his voice as he circled to the left. The shift in their dynamics sustained Thomas, igniting something fiercely resolute within him. Standing together against shared adversity was now the bedrock of both their identities. The overseer reeled back momentarily, a look of disbelief painting his features. Thomas seized the opportunity. "We are not your pawns. We will define our own legacy." His voice rang clear into the din of the chaos, echoing the strength gathered from every whispered conversation of outrage he had overheard. In that moment, Thomas felt the fabric of his life unravel into something more than mere rebellion. He had tapped into a reservoir of courage that filled every void left by fear. It was liberating. Every garbled, snide remark echoed in his mind, but now they were mere shadows of the past. There were no defined roles anymore. Yet there was still danger. The overseer, evidently enraged, lunged again, but Thomas was ready this time. He recognized the power of decision. As he raised a hand in defiance, he connected to a part of himself that had always been there, swelling with untapped potential. There was clarity. What if this was precisely what leadership required? A revolt not just against the overseer, but against complacency within himself. James's presence shifted the air, bolstering Thomas's resolve. Fighting back the urge to retreat into the safe confines of his former identity was a choice, an active decision reinforcing that his past no longer dictated his future. "Together," he shouted, and for the first time it sounded less like a plea and more like a declaration. As the overseer closed in, Thomas whirled to face him, moving not just with desperation, but with certainty. This confrontation had become a battleground of values, testing the very core of who he had thought he was. With every move, Thomas dismantled the anxiety constricting his spirit and reclaimed his narrative. He advanced with laser-like focus, aware there were still hurdles to cross. This wasn't an endgame, but a potent beginning, the kind that defies conventions and sparks untold transformations. As the overseer closed back again, Thomas whirled to face him, moving not just with desperation, but with certainty. This confrontation had become a battleground of values, testing the very core of who he had thought he was. With every move, Thomas dismantled the anxiety constricting his spirit and reclaimed his narrative. He advanced with laser-like focus, aware there were still hurdles to cross. This wasn't an endgame, but a potent beginning, the kind that defies conventions and sparks untold transformations. The overseer stumbled back again, confusion flickering in his eyes, revealing that he underestimated the resolve of both brothers. Driven by an internal fire, Thomas pressed forward, confronting the unyielding force with a poise he hadn't recognized in himself before. Yet shadows still lingered. As hope surged, it intertwined with uncertainty. What lay beyond this moment?
Would they negotiate their way into the sunlight, or could the dark tendrils of their heritage pull them back into the abyss? In a pivotal instant, Thomas realized that breaking free entailed not just rebellion against the overseer, but an enduring commitment to introspection and growth. Perhaps liberation was not merely external. It involved understanding his own legacy, redefining it with every choice they made from here on out. He took a determined step forward, feeling James by his side, ready for whatever came next. But as Thomas braced himself for the aftermath of the imminent clash, a sobering thought pierced through. How could he ensure that this struggle was meaningful and not just another chapter in an endless cycle of oppression? The overseer stumbled, his eyes narrowed in frustration, but in that moment of his vulnerability, Thomas felt a surge of agency. Every ounce of his redefining strength lent clarity to the chaos surrounding him. He had stepped away from the identity that had been imposed upon him and began to shape his own reality. As he and James circled each other, synchronizing their movements, Thomas recognized that this was more than a confrontation. It was an awakening. "Think," he commanded himself, the internal monologue battling the external threats around him. Each blow exchanged with the overseer wasn't merely a physical struggle, but a reflection of the deep-seated beliefs he had carried. With every encroaching moment of despair, he had the choice: fall back into the known or leap courageously into the unknown. Together echoed through him once more, resonating like a mantra. He felt a burgeoning understanding that the power of their unity was worth more than any past fear they might cling to. It wasn't simply about protecting each other. It was about propelling one another into a newfound identity, free, unshackled, and determined. The overseer lunged again, a fierce embodiment of the elder system, attempting to thwart the emergence of this new self. This time, Thomas anticipated the movement and diverted his energy, using the force of his opponent's momentum against him. As the overseer crashed to the ground, something clicked for Thomas. Perhaps this was the essence of leadership. Not just commanding a following, but knowing when to yield and redirect. But what would this mean for the future? The weight of responsibility began to set upon his shoulders. Was he ready to embrace a leadership role that had always seemed foreign? The adrenaline that had propelled his actions thus far now gave way to introspection. "There's no going back," he muttered quietly to himself as he extended a hand toward James. "We must define what we want." James nodded, invigorated by the shared intent. The overseer stirred, fury rising once more, but Thomas felt fortified, each heartbeat affirming his evolution. With the overseer scrambling, he seized the chance to articulate what had shifted within him. "You taught us to survive," he started, his voice slicing through the tense atmosphere. "But we will thrive." A fleeting flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Would the overseer's brutality give way to the bravery required for this new path? Before Thomas could dwell too long on that concern, he locked eyes with James. The unspoken bond between them solidified into a pact, a commitment to foster their growth in whatever way was necessary. They stepped back as the overseer attempted to recover, his menacing glare still fierce, but now tinged with uncertainty. "What happens when we break this cycle?" Thomas pondered, his thoughts racing to the horizon that lay ahead of them. In this uncharted territory of self-determination and defiance, they would face not only the overseer, but also the remnants of their own fears. Each moment of triumph demanded reflection, and each step away from the unseen chains required unwavering fortitude. The burden of leadership began to settle in, heavy but not crushing, a motivating weight rather than a debilitating anchor. "Let's move," Thomas urged, but behind him lay ambiguity, the undercurrents of an uncertain future, daunting yet enticing. Maybe this was the true test, not merely unraveling the past, but consciously deciding how they wanted to craft their story.
As they prepared to navigate this fragile new world, a question lingered. Could they harness the lessons of pain to not just survive, but forge a legacy of empowerment that would ripple through generations? The overseer, still caught in his shock of disbelief, looked ready to charge again, as if sensing the tremors of their awakening. The moment of truth crept closer, each breath a reminder that the fight had only just begun. With courage propelling him forward, Thomas steeled himself for the next challenge, knowing they could dictate their path, but at what cost? A tense stillness enveloped the arena as Thomas felt the weight
of the moment pressing against him. With the overseer momentarily halted, he sensed an opening, a fleeting chance to test the resolve they had forged together. Yet the air was thick with doubt, swirling like the dust kicked up in the aftermath of their confrontation. "Are we ready for this?" Thomas questioned internally, his thoughts running wild. What did it mean to step into a leadership role now? The realization that he would need to carry the burden, not just for himself but for James, was daunting. He found himself at a crossroads, wrestling with the fear of failure while also tasting a heady sense of purpose. "Follow my lead," he called to James, trying to mask his own insecurities with a tone of assurance, though uncertainty laced his voice. Together, they would face the overseer once more. Together, they would forge the path ahead. The overseer, bruised but still resolute, flared with rage at their apparent defiance. "You think you've won?" he shot back, the tremors of fear mingling with fury. Thomas could see the cracks forming in the overseer's facade, the moments of vulnerability wavering amidst a pretense of authority. "Victory isn't measured in battles won," Thomas asserted, mind racing as he visually dissected the overseer's posture, searching for weaknesses in his form, in his mindset. "It's determined by the courage to stand up for what is right, even in the face of threats." James stepped beside him, mirroring Thomas's stance, absorbing the duality of what was expected from them. To fight, but not just with physical force, but with the conviction and clarity they had both discovered in this fight. As they expanded their formation, Thomas felt the tension shift, an electric pulse coursing through the air that was born of clarity. A shared intent to not only change their fate, but to redefine their identities, to rise above the labels that had long since bound them. The overseer hesitated, a flicker of doubt flashing in his eyes, but it was quickly cloaked by anger. "This will not end well for you," he bellowed, reeling back, preparing to charge again. But the shift within Thomas was undeniable. His fear began to crystallize into something more. "What if my moment of weakness is my strongest point?" he considered. Was it not through acknowledging fear that he transformed it into courage? The overseer lunged, but Thomas stood firm, channeling their collective strength. He had learned to redirect attack, to use the tumult of energy against its source. "Now, James," he shouted, adjusting abruptly and using the overseer's momentum to steer him off balance, forcing him down once more. "Keep going," James exclaimed, urgency tinged with excitement. In that surge of collaboration, they began to unlock each other's potential, revealing latent abilities to strategize and think critically, all born out of necessity. Thomas felt something inside him shifting, a powerful realization. Together, they weren't just surviving, they were strategizing, learning, and evolving. Each move was deliberate, each setback a revelation. The overseer's determination waned. Against the buoyant spirit they had conjured, they owed it to themselves to push forward, to confront not just the overseer, but the remnants of their former selves, the fear, the doubt, the learned helplessness. But the question lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Were they truly prepared to face the depths of their transformation? What awaited them beyond this conflict? The unknown loomed darker than the overseer's menacing presence, and yet Thomas couldn't help but feel an electric thrill rush through him. As Thomas and James faced the overseer, he realized they were standing on the precipice of their journey, where the fractures of the past met the glimmers of a hopeful future. In that moment, he understood his true challenge wasn't simply to defeat the overseer, but to embrace the full weight of what leadership demanded. The overseer glared, poised to strike again, But this time, uncertainty was etched on his face, the fear of being rendered powerless against the emergence of something unstoppable. With adrenaline surging, Thomas took a deep breath, ready to confront not just a foe, but his own deeply ingrained uncertainties. What would it truly mean to redefine victory? The answer loomed ahead, just out of reach, shrouded in the mist of the unknown. Would they embrace vulnerability as a strength or cower before the darkness that was yet to come? The tension pulsed in the air like a heartbeat, marking the stage for what lay ahead. In that charged moment, as Thomas locked eyes with the overseer, a new determination surged within him. This wasn't merely about survival. It was the beginning of a transformation that would test not just their bodies, but their spirits. The overseer, battered yet defiant, had been the embodiment of everything Thomas had sought to escape: oppression, control, and tyranny. Now, James, Thomas urged again, recognizing that his voice was a lifeline, a call to action that could either galvanize or falter. It resonated deep in him, not just as a command, but as a pivotal moment of shared purpose. Instead of feeling the weight of despair, he focused on harnessing the energy of the arena, infusing it with the strength of their collective intention. James reacted instinctively, moving in tandem with Thomas. With each step they took, the overseer grew more agitated, more erratic in his attacks. But rather than feeling overwhelmed by the threat, Thomas began to witness possibilities unfolding before him. As the overseer's movements became more desperate, Thomas recognized these as weaknesses. They executed their strategy flawlessly, a series of calculated maneuvers that felt less like a fight and more like a dance propelled by mutual trust. Each twist and sidestep brought out a strength in both of them that had seemed dormant until now. Their collaboration became a physical manifestation of their evolving identities. What began as apprehension turned into an exhilarating embrace of their capabilities. With every misstep the overseer took, Thomas felt less like a boy forced into a role and more like a leader crafted by circumstance. There was a revelation in this experience, understanding that leadership was not about dominance, but rather about guiding oneself and others through fear and uncertainty. He dared to embrace his vulnerabilities, not as flaws, but as avenues to forge a deeper connection with James. "Think of why we fight," Thomas shouted over the ruckus, grounding them both in their motivation. "This is about our freedom, about reimagining who we could be." At that moment, Thomas realized they were not just confronting a foe, they were reclaiming their narrative. Each punch thrown was layered with significance. Every strategic retreat they made was infused with purpose. The overseer often charged at them, but now Thomas saw each offensive as a chance, an opportunity to pivot and direct the trajectory of their battles. But as he maneuvered through the intensity of the conflict, a new doubt surfaced. Would courage alone secure their freedom? The overseer was faltering, but the real fight was within Thomas himself. How far would he be willing to go? Was he ready to face the full weight of leadership, understanding that every decision forged not just their futures, but also shaped who he would become? With a sudden vigor, the overseer lunged at them again, unpredictably, fueled by desperation. Thomas and James sidestepped simultaneously, a mirrored action born of their newfound bond. The resulting clash sent the overseer sprawling, but it left them both breathless. Exhilaration mingled with the reality that a dangerous precipice lay before them, teeming with unforeseen challenges. As the overseer lay on the ground, struggling to regain composure, something nagged at Thomas. They had pushed back against a significant threat, but what lay ahead was equally daunting. Recognizing that this battle was just a precursor to the internal wars they must fight for themselves made the stakes clearer. The journey to redefine victory was just beginning. With a heavy heart, Thomas surveyed the arena, the echo of the preceding chaos still resounding around them. Keys to their liberation were within grasp, yet he was acutely aware that with every victory came the responsibility of the choices he still had to make. Determined to seize this momentum, Thomas met James' gaze. Together, their resolve solidified. "Let's finish this," he declared, bracing for the turbulence that still awaited.
But before they could follow through, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows, challenging everything Thomas thought he understood about loyalty and betrayal. This new encounter promised to redefine not just their journey, but their very sense of self. As the unexpected figure stepped into view, Thomas's heart sank. Nathan, his childhood friend and confidant, appeared on the fringes of their chaotic struggle, eyes ablaze with fury and betrayal. "You think you can just abandon everything we've built?" he shouted, voice echoing through the clearing. Nathan's presumption cut deeper than Thomas anticipated, provoking a surge of self-doubt, the very thing he had fought to transcend. "Abandon?" Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil. "I'm not
abandoning anything. I'm reclaiming my own life, a life that doesn't serve to support oppression or captivity." Each word felt like an extension of his resolve, a thread woven into the fabric of his new identity. Nathan's expression shifted between confusion and anger, as if grappling with the rupture of their shared past. "This isn't the answer, Thomas. You were destined to uphold the legacy of your family. You throw it all away for someone like him?" He gestured disdainfully at James, whose presence had become synonymous with hope and agency. Thomas looked squarely at Nathan, breathing through the surge of emotions that threatened to drown him. "I'm choosing to break the cycle, just like I chose to stand beside James." Rising strength coursed through every fiber of his being, morphing the fear into fierce determination. "I refuse to live shackled by a legacy that celebrates oppression." James, emboldened by their shared conviction, stepped closer to Thomas. "Together, we will forge our own path," he affirmed. The bond formed in those defining moments had evolved into something powerful, a commitment to redefine their futures, regardless of the noise that dared to challenge them. Suddenly, the tension escalated as Nathan lunged forward, fueled by desperation. "You think this ends well? Look at the world around you," he warned. But Thomas felt something shift within him. This wasn't just a conflict against Nathan or the overseer. It was a battle against every fear that had ever held him captive. He stood firm, a newfound clarity captured in his gaze. "No, Nathan, this is where it begins. It's time to transform the legacy of our families into one that respects every life." It was not merely defiance. It was a declaration of freedom imbued with the potential to reshape their destinies. The struggle intensified, and Nathan's anger was palpable. But Thomas could see in his friend's eyes a flicker of consideration. Perhaps a dawning realization that forged through conflict lay a transformative power. Perhaps this wasn't just about perceptions of loyalty, but the yearning for an opportunity to step into the light rather than remain enveloped in the dark motifs of their shared past. Thomas moved strategically around Nathan, drawing upon the confidence forged alongside James. This newfound strength was not merely physical. It was a mental and emotional shift that would allow him to reconcile the past with a vision for the future. As the tension between them swelled, Thomas felt the weight of their legacy pressing down. He saw it not as a burden, but an opportunity to redefine what legacy meant, a blend of personal choice, authenticity, and the ever-elusive freedom they sought to claim together. James kept at his side, watching Nathan closely. "We're not just fighting to change ourselves," he declared, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. "We're fighting for every person who has been silenced." The momentum began to shift. A shared understanding pulsed between the three men. The fire of their confrontation bore witness to the possibility that all who had to confront one another must remain enemies. In that moment, Thomas realized they were sculpting a new narrative, not only challenging the oppressors, but also questioning the philosophy of inheritance and loyalty that had maintained the status quo. And then, slowly, Nathan took a step back, the fury in his gaze loosening. The trappings of childhood allegiance melted away, revealing the vulnerabilities he shared with Thomas. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, burdened yet filled with a sense of possibility. Thomas didn't hesitate. "I want you to join us. Reclaim your story, Nathan.
help rewrite our legacy. He sensed James's resolve weave into his words, fueling the significance behind the invitation. There is power in unity. Together we can disrupt the chains we've been born into. And then, slowly, Nathan took a step back, the fury in his gaze loosening. The trappings of childhood allegiance melted away, revealing the vulnerabilities he shared with Thomas. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, burdened yet filled with a sense of possibility. Thomas didn't hesitate. "I want you to join us. Reclaim your story, Nathan. Help rewrite our legacy." He sensed James's resolve weave into his words, fueling the significance behind the invitation. There is power in unity. Together, we can disrupt the chains we've been born into. There was silence, the realization shimmering in the air, heavy yet transformative. Nathan weighed the implications of their intertwined futures. Beneath the weight of his anguish, perhaps there was a glimmer of choice, a potential to redefine not just their past, but the futures of those who came after them. As Nathan flickered between resolve and trepidation, Thomas sensed that their collective journey was becoming a tapestry of reclamation, healing, and understanding. The uncertainty surrounding them echoed, but at that moment hope surged through the air, connecting the three men like threads in a dynamic fabric of change. It was time to act. Arms extended toward the horizon, they would forge this new path together. The overseer lay subdued, immobilized by the strength of their budding unity. The air buzzed not only with the promise of vengeance, but with the chance to change their stories. "We take our fates into our own hands," Thomas declared decisively, channeling the essence of his transformation. "Together, we will create a legacy rooted in recognition and empowerment." And in that moment, they stood shoulder to shoulder, not solely bound by the burdens of the past, but as architects of a future crafted through choices that spiraled toward a greater purpose. With the dark clouds of their legacy dimming behind them, the dawn of a new era awaited, one decorated with resilience, reclamation, and the courageous will to choose their own destinies. It was in this crucible of confrontation and solidarity that Thomas finally recognized his place in the world. Not just as a Grayson, but as a man willing to transcend the chains of expectation and usher in a brighter horizon for himself and those he stood beside. This was the moment they embraced empathy over enmity, and it was in this realization that a powerful legacy began to emerge, one that breathed life into the once stagnant stories of oppression, transforming them into spirited tales of shared freedom. And now, they were ready for whatever came next. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about this thrilling conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this incredible transformation. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of following through on these actions.